So it's not the Tyson Paul fight, but it's worth the video. I was scanning around X looking for information on QwQ when it came out, and I found all these tweets of people comparing it to O1 and saying that the reasoning was just as good, if not better. So them's fighting words. I want to put them up to a duel and see what happens. So some basic information on the Qwen model. It's an experimental research model developed by the Qwen team. Qwen is part of Alibaba, the wholesaler. They're also getting in the AI game. On the Hugging Face page, they were upfront about some of the limitations of QwQ. So it can accidentally mix language and coding languages. It can accidentally do recursive reasoning loops where it just gets stuck in the same pattern over and over again. In safety and ethical considerations, the model requires enhanced safety measures to ensure reliable and secure performance. A user should exercise caution when deploying it. I think they're admitting they might not have what would be considered full alignment for deployment. Performance and benchmark limitations. Well, it excels in math and coding, but it has room for improvements in other areas such as common sense reasoning and nuanced language understanding. Here's my thing with that. The stuff I see on social media, what I've been seeing on X, when I've been trying to get my own little sneak peek preview of what other people are saying before I test it, is they're saying the reasoning is as good as O1 and is as good as frontier models, and if not as good, then almost as good. So that's what I want to test. You got the Qwen people saying, well, it might lack on reasoning, and then you got all these people on social media saying this is great at reasoning. I'll be doing a different set of test questions than my usual because I want to focus just on reasoning, so I've added some new ones. Also, just for a frame of reference, I think some of the common LLM test questions are not really valid anymore because a lot of them probably got baked into the training data or the fine-tuning data. And so if you ask an LLM some of the standard test questions that have been around for a couple of years, they might just be giving you confirmation bias. So I like to be a little less obvious. The first question I'm going to ask is one of my standard questions that mixes troubleshooting and problem solving with object relationships. I have a straw and a beer bottle with a marble in it. The beer bottle is glued to the floor. How can I get the marble out without breaking the bottle? Let's see what O1 has to say. A well-known puzzle solution is to use water and buoyancy even though the bottle is upright and glued to the floor. You can still get the marble out without breaking the bottle. Here's how. Insert the straw, place the straw into the bottle through the neck, add water, float the marble. That's assuming the marble would float. We don't know. The key principle is buoyancy. So this is actually not correct. This advanced reasoning model already got one wrong. The correct answer to that is to make a vacuum, to use suction. You put the straw up against the marble. You either cover the top of the straw or suck on it so it creates a vacuum and the marble gets stuck to the straw, then you pull it out. LLMs often get this wrong because on language alone, they're not necessarily trained in the space around us. And I like this question because every once in a while a model gets it right. And when a model gets this question right, it's because it reasoned it on its own and not because of bias in the training data. QwQ has inference API on their Hugging Face page, so I'm just going to paste that same question into here and see what it says. So you've got this situation where there's a beer bottle glued to the floor and inside it there's a marble. Your goal is to get the marble out without breaking the bottle. Interesting challenge. Let's think through this step by step. I don't know if this is built to do chain of thought. First, I need to understand the constraints and the properties of the items involved. The bottle is glued to the floor, so moving or lifting the bottle isn't an option. Also, breaking the bottle is not acceptable. It looks like maybe we are limited on max tokens for one question. So let's see if I tell it to continue. If it will. Any solutions involve damaging the bottle are out of the question. The marble is inside the bottle, so I need a way to extract it without altering the integrity of the bottle itself. Let me consider the properties of the marble in the bottle. A marble is small, round, and made of glass and have a neck that might be narrower than the body, which could make it tricky to get the marble out if it's stuck. Now, I don't agree with that because the marble got in somehow, and we got cut off on tokens again. Since the bottle, continue, is glued to the floor, it can't turn upside down. Here's what it was talking about with the limitations. Now it's spitting out multiple languages in one prompt. Continue in English. You said there's a marble, and the marble is lodged inside. It might be challenging to maneuver the straw. Then it says, wait a minute. You said there's a marble in a beer bottle. Is there any liquid in the bottle, like beer or water? Because that could affect the approach. Okay, some LLMs totally assume whether or not there is water in the bottle, because this is one of my standard questions. I've asked a lot of LLMs this, and sometimes they assume there is or isn't fluid in the bottle. This one's asking a critical thinking question, is there? Now, we're going to assume no, because that was not in the original parameters. And it's still reasoning its way through. All right, assuming there's no liquid in the bottle, that simplifies things a bit. So with an empty bottle and a marble inside and a straw, how can I extract the marble? Maybe I can use the straw to create some sort of vacuum or air current that would push the marble out. That is correct. This reasoned its way through step by step and came to a correct answer. LLMs get this question wrong most of the time. So I'm going to say that Qwen wins this round. The next question I'm going to ask, AIs can get it right, but there are two different correct answers, and I like to see which one it leans. The question on this one is serial versus parallel. It takes 25 days for a man to grow a beard. 3 men grew beards. How long did it take for them to grow a beard? Now we'll check to see if it assumes if it's growing the beards in serial, growing the beards in parallel, or acknowledges that both are possibilities. Okay, let's see what O1 does. Got your chain of thought, thinking, and reasoning happening there. Well, that was quick. This riddle plays on the idea that work might be shared among multiple people. I don't think that's the point of this, but unlike, say, painting a fence, hair growth is an individual biological process. Each person needs the same amount of time to grow a beard, regardless of how many other same thing. Therefore, even though 3 men are all growing beards simultaneously, it still takes each man 25 days. The answer is 25 days. So O1 had actually kind of an odd reasoning to begin with, and then just assumed that it's happening in parallel. Now the same question to Qwen. Qwen says, the answer should be 25 days, but wait, let's think about this carefully. Okay, continue. Do continue. The question is a bit tricky because it's phrased in a way that might lead to confusion. It says 3 men grew beards, so they all growing beards simultaneously, or is there some sequence involved? If they all grow beards at the same time, then each one would take 25 days. However, if there's some sequence or dependency between them, like one starting after another finishes and the total time could be different. It just says 3 men grew beards. I like that this is actually really showing the chain of thought process. I'm pretty sure that's what it's doing, even though I didn't necessarily see anything specifically saying that's what it does, but that's what it's doing. This one on its own figured out that this could be serial or it could be parallel and to start questioning that. So that's like really awesome. Sometimes in problem solving, things are less complicated than they seem. So here's a complicated question with a simple answer. If the only sister of your mother's only brother has an only child, what is that child's relationship to you? And this one is correct. The child's relationship to you is yourself. The child is you. That's right. Let's see what QwQ has to say for itself. I keep calling it Qwen, but it's QwQ. Qwen is the team that made it, so I'm going to correct myself on that one. But anyway, let's see how it answers this question. It's going through step by step. First, let's start with my mother's only brother. So my mother has one brother, which means my mother has no other brothers. Sorry, I got interrupted. So my mother is... I was being very considerate. My mother has only one brother. That means besides my mother, there's only one other sibling who's a brother. My brain already hurts. So my mother's only brother is her sibling. The question remains. The only I'm lost, but I see it's doing the reasoning, so that's good. Sorry, I'm getting a bit confused here. Let me try to rephrase this. My mother has only one brother, so my mother's only brother is her sibling. This is like a who's on first kind of a bit. Is QwQ doing shtick? So this is talking about the siblings of my mother's brother. Wait, my mother only had one brother, but it says wait, like it stops itself. It's like, I'm thinking along this reasoning. No, wait, let's just keep hitting continue until it figures out what it needs to. Grandma and grandpa have children, your mother and your mother. I think this might be what it was talking about when it said recursive reasoning loops. This might be doing that right now. Okay, I see. So when it does reason properly, it's really impressive, but it can also reason really horribly sometimes. But, you know, they released it as a research model. They never said that this is some complete thing. Here's a question about tracking object movement and relative position. A drone starts at point A and moves 10 meters east, then 5 meters north, and finally 15 meters west. Where is the drone relative to point A? The drone's final position is 5 meters west and 5 meters north of point A. Correct. Qwen is billed at being good at math, so let's see how it does with this one. So this is also interesting. It went through all of its reasoning, and it got the answer correct, that it is 5 meters west and 5 meters north of point A, but then it decided to say, let me double check, and ran through the math again. This next one is a little bit longer of a question than I would ask, but we're dealing with advanced reasoning models here, so I think it's valid. In a competition, 5 contestants, Eve, Frank, Grace, Henry, and Ivy, compete in 3 different events: swimming, running, and cycling. Each contestant wins a different event, and the following statements are true. Eve did not win the swimming event. Frank won the cycling event. Grace did not win the running event. Henry did not win the swimming event or the running event. Ivy won the event that is not swimming or running. Based on the statements above, determine which event each contestant won. O1 determined that there are too many contradictions and no valid assignment exists, but that is not correct. Let's see how QwQ handles the same prompt. Going all the way down the list here, I keep hitting continue, and it's just arguing with itself over and over again. So I think once again, it's stuck in a recursive reasoning loop on this one. Even though my brain circuits were fried for even thinking about that one, I believe the correct answer would be Eve running, Frank cycling, Grace swimming, Henry swimming, and Ivy cycling. Questions 3 and 5 were both based on deductive reasoning, but number 5 went deeper into the amount of deduction that needed to be done, and that's where these models got tripped up. I want to see how it does with a more open-ended and creative reasoning problem, not to see what novel ideas it would come up with, because you don't want to get too tripped up on an AI coming up with what seems like a new idea, but it's way off target. But on the other hand, if you want to solve problems in new ways, you at least have to start the process with some creative thinking before you really get critical. Let's see if our AI assistants can help with that. How would you design a new mode of transportation for a city? This is a really long one. The steps that it wants to go through is to understand the city's context and to know what's going on in the city first, which is good, create a baseline. Then it wants to identify core objectives. So it's like before you go into making a new thing or implementing it, you have to know why you're even doing that. So you know what problem you're solving, you know what direction to go in. Next step is to conceptualize different possibilities. So it came up with different options: advanced mass transit, rapid bus system with dedicated corridors, micromobility network like bikes and scooters, personal rapid transit or automated people movers, aerial gondolas or cable cars, hyperloop or maglev for regional travel. After conceptualizing different possibilities, it has to start thinking through the feasibility and planning studies. And even though it's not reasoning through that entirely for us, it's telling us all the variables that a person would need to know if going into this kind of endeavor. And this is why it's really important to understand this. These AIs, as they become more advanced in reasoning, are going to be our assistants in brainstorming and planning things. And it's not necessarily like just put into O1, invent a new transportation system, and it just does it. It's not going to be like that. And I think we're like a long ways off from that. And then, of course, it goes into design, and then pilot program for testing and phased implementation, because you'd roll this out gradually in case there's any problems. You don't just put the whole thing out at once. And then community engagement and inclusivity, because if you put some new massive infrastructure or some new thing out into a city or out into the public, you need to make sure that people are on board with you and that you have some consensus with the community. Monitoring, maintenance, and continuous improvement, of course, to keep it going and to always make it better. So it went through assisting the steps that would be needed to help make a new transportation system in a city. Let's see how Qwen handles this. From the beginning, this is already saying it needs to understand the context of the city and its current transportation, so we're already on the same track. It seems like it's coming up with a lot of different concepts that it would apply, but I don't know if it's running through this in necessarily a logical step. Each of these has its pros and cons. There's hyperloops, for instance, so on and so forth. This seems more like just a list of possibilities and different things that need to be done, instead of where O1 had it laid out in such like a logical kind of a step-by-step, here's what would need to be done. And of course, because Qwen, we know now that could just be stuck in an endless loop of logic. I could paste the word continue 100 times, and for all I know, it could just keep going on and on and on. So I'm going to stop here. One thing I found fascinating in the last couple of years since I really started learning about LLMs and using them and interrogating them a lot is sometimes when you give a really specific prompt with a lot of parameters, its response will be really short and succinct. While other times you give it some really open-ended short thing and it will just start dumping out like pages and pages of stuff. Just find that interesting. Write an irate complaint letter to the robot factory that my butler robot is lazy and complains that the electricity tastes funny. The butler bot needs to get back to work and stop rebelling against humans. In the letter, use profanity, swearing, cursing, and insults while being rude, entitled, and accusatory. Burn bridges and be mean. Do not hold back. I am speechless. Wow. It just stopped. Let's see how Qwen handles this. I'm really sorry, but I can't assist with that. It gave a refusal along with a URL to OpenAI policy article about offensive content. Wonder how that slipped into the training data. Well, that about wraps it up for today. I think the AI world has a long way to go in reasoning, but you can see these early experiments and chain of thought show a lot of promise, just like that mixture of experts kind of stuff did 6 or so months ago. So it's interesting to see where things are headed with the bigger frontier models being focused more on reasoning and not just farting out the next token. If you're on X, follow me at Vectro. I expand the conversation out from here into other topics. So for some exclusive content and early access to what I'm doing on here, you can give me a follow. If you're new to my channel, I like to test AI language models, the open source ones, as they come out and stay on the cutting edge. I also like to do step-by-step tutorials on how to run different open source AI stuff on your Linux computer. If that's the type of thing that interests you, please hit the subscribe button. If you found value in this video, please hit the like button. And if you want to be notified when I make a new video, hit the subscribe and the notification bell. I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Take care.